Vision of Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney. At first glance, this poem can seem to be a poem about the power of nature and a conflict between nature and people. But actually, there's more to it than that. It was written in 1964 by Seamus Heaney, who's from Northern Ireland, and it's said to be inspired by the Aran Islands, which are some islands that are part of the Republic of Ireland. Heaney's from Northern Ireland, and is a country which for many centuries has had conflict. Northern Ireland has remained part of the United Kingdom. In 1922, Southern Ireland had gained independence, but Northern Ireland didn't. The Protestants who lived in Northern Ireland were called the Unionists, and they wanted to remain part of Great Britain. However, there are many Catholics who also live in Northern Ireland, and they did not want to remain part of the United Kingdom. And as a result of this, the Catholics became the underclass, and they were discriminated against by the government and by the police. Seamus Heaney was born to a Catholic family. His message in this poem is one about life under constant enemy occupation. And he feels that it can leave people feeling very sad, but they stop trying to fight against the occupation. And it's a warning to people that when you are occupied by enemy forces, they can actually appear very reasonable, but really they're a threat. And it's not always a physical threat, it's not always an actual war, but it can be a gradual oppression of your human rights and taking away your liberties. Now, the structure of this poem is that it's written in the form of a sonnet, and it's written in blank verse, which was actually the preferred structure of many British poets. Shakespeare, for example, often wrote in sonnets. So it's surprising that Seamus Heaney would choose this. However, he has written it in such a way that it doesn't follow the usual rules. For example, a sonnet would normally have 14 lines, whereas Seamus Heaney has 19. And he also stresses the syllable in the first and the last line. He stresses the first syllable as opposed to the second. So maybe this is an act of him rebelling against British structure and British rules. There's also a lot of caesura and enjambment within the poem, and this leaves a feeling of chaos, which is very suitable for the invasion that he refers to. The first language that I've highlighted is, we are prepared, we build our houses squat. And there's an image of a house. What's really interesting about this is the use of the pronoun we. It shows a sense of unity. And it suggests that people within Northern Ireland are unified and working together, that many of them don't like this occupation that they are suffering under. The verbs are really important too. He uses prepared and build. These are proactive verbs, but they also are calm and peaceful verbs. It suggests that the Catholics within Northern Ireland don't pose a threat. And when you compare it to the verbs used later in the poem, when he talks about the occupiers, the British, the verbs there are much more violent. And that shows a difference between the people who are invading and the people who live there. There's a lot of juxtaposition in this poem. You can see, for example, that the sea is exploding comfortably. And the one that I've highlighted is spits like a tamed cat turned savage. There's a sense from this that the enemy can appear very harmless at first. They can appear tame. But actually they can quickly turn into something quite sinister and dangerous. And what you need to be aware of is welcoming, like you would a tame cat to your house, that it can become very destructive, even if it appears to be something that is not posing a risk. There's a semantic field of war in this poem. Dives, strafes, salvo, and I've highlighted we are bombarded by the empty air. The plosives, that's used here with a B in bombarded. It's a sudden and shocking sound. And what he's stressing here is that the air is empty. It's not a physical threat that is attacking these people. It is something that is equally dangerous because it's attacking their mind. It is making them feel oppressed. Their identity is being eroded. And this is really reinforced in the last line, that it's a huge nothing that they fear. So although it's not a direct attack, I've drawn a man who's being pushed over by seemingly nothing. It is dangerous. There are some interesting comparisons. London would be a good comparison because we see people oppressed. My Last Duchess, where the upper class duke is able to oppress his wife. Ozymandias, where a tyrant rules. Checking out my history, where we see people oppressed and not allowed to embrace their own cultural identity. This poem is still very important today. Northern Ireland continues to experience conflict. Indeed, for the last 2 years, they've had no sitting parliament because the parliament has not been able to agree with each other. Very recently, a journalist was killed in an uprising. It is a strained relationship that they live under, and therefore this poem, although written in 1964, does have a huge impact on life today. I hope that this has been useful, and that's Storm on the Island.